figures to flee from San Francisco to Austin. I went with them in 2020, and now I think, fighting the good fight, fighting the good governance fight in the U.S., which is something I want to get into, Joe, because a lot of people here are focused a lot on the sort of flight option or exit option of setting up a new sovereign territory elsewhere, or something along those lines. But you've chosen, for now at least, to stay and fight, and so big battle, right? Whether it be the FDA or DC or state and local governments, and so I just want to get into why you've chosen that model for now, and what you think the prospects are going forward for other models, and when the right timing might be for doing something elsewhere, if indeed that's still your long-term vision. You were an original gangster in the space, although it feels weird to call you a gangster. Seasteading Institute, going on almost 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, with Patrick, our former boss, Peter Thiel.
I think I introduced Patrick to Peter Thiel I think it must have been, about 16 or 17 years ago. The very first clip of me, Michael, on TV ever was me as chairman of the Seasteading Institute on national TV with Glenn Beck. So that's what you found when you searched for me for the next several years. Very entertaining.
You'll find a bunch of other stuff too, but that's a good one. Patrick just shouted out 2007. He's here in the audience, so you can maybe go give an overview of your role in the space and how long you've been into it, what your interests are, what you've done in the past, and where you see the space going forward. I also have Nicholas Onziger here with me, who might interject and ask you some questions. He's deep in the space. The two of us interviewed you last year at Zuzalo, and I know people found that one of the most insightful sessions at the 2 months we were there. So thanks for doing this again, and I'll let you give your spiel for now, and Nicholas might interject with a question here too.
Awesome. Well, Michael, I appreciate it. It's good to see you all. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with everyone. I guess I'm up to 6 unicorns across $1 billion now, but who's counting? I am busy building here. I love the idea of building a new country, a new city-state. It's been something I've been interested in for a long time. As an entrepreneur, Michael, I think what we look for is we look for big gaps in the world. We look for what's possible versus what actually exists. Maybe just, obviously I'm here right now fighting for the U.S. I moved to Texas. Listen, if Texas falls, the U.S. falls. If the U.S. falls, I think it's actually a lot harder to make these new cities actually work, these new countries work. The best way we're going to make one of them work is during a time when there's a good regime in the U.S. to get started, because defense is very hard and very expensive. And I think we have a very dark world if the U.S. falls. So I have teams in 19 states. I'm trying to teach government how to take the values of liberty and accountability and incentives and keep things functional here.
Recording in progress.
It's recording in progress. That's fine. And so yes, I am fighting for the U.S. I would love to use success in the U.S. to build a new city. If you want to talk about gaps, which I'm sure you guys think a lot about this, one of my favorite mechanisms right now for that is just to go through the U.S. agencies. I don't know if you guys are already talking about this, but basically you can make a list, right? So I'm friends with Leonard Leo. There's about 5 major people on the pro-liberty side, kind of running pro-liberty empires here in the U.S., kind of fighting this fight, which I think is still worth us doing. He's the one who ran the Federalist Society. He's put in a bunch of great judges. We have a case before the Supreme Court we've been wanting for like 15 years to get rid of what's called the Chevron Doctrine, which basically, that and a couple others, we're going to basically show that these agencies are unconstitutional, and then we're going to have to slow them down. But for the sake of this conversation, if you want to know where the U.S. is most broken, it's all these agencies. So the SEC obviously is really, really broken. Everyone in crypto knows that. There's tons of things that are illegal because of the SEC. The FDA is broken, so there's always biotech business models we could do at these places. And all sorts of things that are illegal that shouldn't be. There's probably ways you can do monkey testing and things that that you should be doing to advance things to help people. I don't want to hurt monkeys, but it's better to hurt monkeys than to have our family die of cancer, right? So there's always more aggressive things we should be doing there. HUD is totally broken. Sorry, Michael, you guys hear me still? Is this working?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, and so there's always ways in which we can have much better cities. I think some of the very biggest gaps are tied to the DOT, Department of Transportation, being broken. Infrastructure. This is hard, right? So if you're going to do a new city properly, a new city state properly, if you want to take advantage of the biggest gaps, to really take advantage of the infrastructure gaps, you probably need at least a multi-billion-dollar project, because there's ways we could be doing tunnels with boring companies. There's ways we could be doing infrastructure that just completely transforms society for everyone. But obviously, it's a big, big gap to prove it. To prove it's a lot of money.
Bottom left. Bottom left, unmute.
Am I muted?
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks.
Click on.
All right, technical difficulties. So anyway, the list goes on. I think it's very interesting to go through and like say like what are the big agencies, immigration policy, and then aside from agencies, and I think these contribute to it, but there's a huge culture gap. Our culture right now in the U.S. is very, very broken compared to what it needs to be. I interviewed one of our friends who started the effective accelerationist movement on the podcast last week, and it is a really important point for like how do you have a place where people are very optimistic on the future, where people are saying, we have science fiction that looks up to like a great future again, as opposed to dystopian future. So I mean, I think if you can have that's another gap. Maybe you find a way to solve that culturally with the place you're building. But so I think this is very important. Personally, I think building a great city-state would help the U.S. The model I have is that Singapore helps China a lot. Listen, China's screwed up right now in so many ways, but Singapore at least like Deng Xiaoping at least listened to Lee Kuan Yew and learned how to engage the markets in positive ways. So similarly, having a really strong model here, another Hong Kong, another Singapore of the Americas, I think it'd be hugely important for the U.S. The same thing with Europe, if we were to build one or two of those there. So this could be a very positive thing. You're not going to have a world that works with like all the giant places broken. The point is to fix the giant places with positive examples. Is my view.
Great. How can positive examples such as the one we want to create here in Prosper and Honduras also feed back into the United States and how fix things there?
Well, when you show an example that's working to help a lot of people, that's working to fix something broken people don't like, it helps a lot. So what you need is in prosperity. You need to say, what are the biggest gaps in the U.S., right? So it's very important. You're an entrepreneur. You're building into the gaps in the world. So then you need to look at those agencies. Which one are you competing with? The SEC gap, with the FDA gap, with the HUD gap? Like I said, my favorite gaps are like power, transportation, energy. That's very expensive. Maybe you can't do that yet. But what are those gaps? Let's be very, very aggressive about trying things and doing things that you would never be allowed to do in the U.S. And then getting something to work. That then kind of like when people in the U.S. see, wow, this is working way better than us, you basically get shamed into going along and going along with it and trying it out. So I think just really focusing on those is really important.
So that's very topical because here at Vitalia we're focusing on the FDA gap. So what are your favorite stories or advice to offer biotech companies that go alternative paths to the FDA?
This is obviously really tough. Like one of the biggest gaps is not the FDA, is the FTC, and it's basically impossible to do the FTC gap because you can't get big enough companies without selling into these places. The FDA is a little bit in between. I think there are ways you probably can prove things and be testing things way faster that then are kind of like forced to be brought back in faster because they're curing critical things, into Europe, into Australia, into the U.S. We've been mapping this out a lot with a lot of the very wealthy Middle Eastern countries that are important allies. They're trying to figure out how they can do their own version of this. What I would say is there's just lots of things that are very clearly life-saving things that the FDA just sitting on that you can probably prove out 2 or 3 years ahead of time and even just accelerate it and make a lot of money doing that. One of my favorites, for example, I don't know if the company be willing to do it. That's a problem. Is the company that's willing to do it, which I think some of them will. Like one of my favorites is we can do, cell therapy for bone marrow transplants. You get the rejection rates from about 30% down to about 0.5% right now, and also cure the cancers better. And it turns out this could actually be used for a lot of non-cancer things as well, because if you can replace someone's immune system safely by sorting cells one by one, there's all sorts of other kind of autoimmune diseases that a lot of people suffer from. You can fix. So, unfortunately, there's not a lot of stories of this, and unfortunately, the FDA is acting more like a mafia these days, is my understanding. So, part of what we have to do in the U.S. to make this possible for you is to kind of push back on that mafia, put people in power who are more open-minded, and then when we have an even better example elsewhere, they're not going to try to cancel those companies, not going to try to punish them for working with you, because we do need to access these markets ultimately, is my view, to get the really big outcomes.
Yeah, so can you talk a bit more about the problem with the FTC, because I'm not super aware of that.
Well, the FTC has been weaponized. So right now, Lena Khan is in charge of the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and basically they're really, really hurting our space by making a lot of mergers impossible. And even when it's illegal to block a merger in the U.S., we've caught them emailing their counterparts in Europe and getting them to block mergers and then using that as a way to do it. And so one example, you'll get a company like Illumina, which is a very important company. I don't know, it's worth $60 billion, say, and it has massive distribution for cheapest cheapest gene reading devices, all sorts of other things like that they power all this innovation on top of them. And you'll get people like at Grail who spends billions and billions of dollars figuring out how to detect cancer early, and Illumina wanted to buy Grail. They wanted to roll it out. Unfortunately, I lost my mother to cancer over 15 years ago now. We didn't detect it until stage 4, so she had no chance. If you detect cancers at stage 1 or 2, which we can do now, which is a little bit of someone's blood, then you actually have a very good chance to save their lives. So this was very exciting to me. They're going to roll it out with their massive marketing apparatus. Lena Khan blocked them from buying it when she couldn't block them anymore. She got the Europeans to block them. Eventually, it never really worked out. You probably killed thousands of people per month by blocking that, right? And so the FTC situation, and they're doing it to many others as well. Activision had to sue the FTC and fight for over a year to be allowed to be bought by Microsoft, right? So a lot of my friends were making a lot of money selling this Figma to Adobe, and that got blocked. The list goes on. It's basically really screwing up our venture ecosystem, it's screwing up our venture culture, and we have to basically allowed to buy and sell companies and merge companies, and they really seem to be against that. So it's a big crisis right now.
So you're saying the bottleneck there is that it would be hard to become a big pharma company, even though you have sort of traction initially in another market outside?
If you don't eventually get access to sell into the US, to sell into Europe, to sell into the big global markets, you're not going to get to be a very big company. And for this to work, you have to create very big companies. You have to have very big companies that care about what you're doing. Otherwise, we'll always be the little kids. Now, starting off as little kids is fine, but the goal is to get this to scale to actually matter, to actually impact the US. And so, there's just a lot of complicated challenges there. My point was the FTC is probably one of the harder ones, which is why it's more problematic. I think there's things we could build despite the FDA and HUD and DOT and SEC, et cetera. But FTC really does try to keep companies from merging, and then that's going to work. That's going to work globally. So we have some really big global problems we got to solve, and then there's other problems we can arbitrage better.
Yeah. So how far do you think we could get with medical tourism? Because it's very easy for US patients to come here, 1.5-hour flight from Miami.
I think that's not a bad model. I'm a proud small investor. I think what you're doing makes a lot of sense. I think to really show the world how broken the U.S. is, we have to create something that competes in multiple areas. So I think you need to pick a few others, and you need to have, I think my goal will be start with where you're starting, prove it out, get something that makes hundreds of millions of dollars, and get it big enough you can get billionaires or others to invest, or big companies to invest, and then compete on other areas as well. And I think whether it's DOT or DOE or HUD or SEC or et cetera, I think crypto things and otherwise, I think there's more and more you have to build. And for me, the biggest thing that's broken right now in the West is probably our cities. I think actually building a dense city the right way, with the right infrastructure, with the right crime apparatus, with the right immigration apparatus, with the right culture, and having like a positive city that was set up so it could not get captured by the progressives, that would be amazing. Because I think people are desperate for example of a good city right now. They've pretty much all been captured in the U.S.
So regardless of whether or not this works out down here, what makes you more optimistic or less optimistic when it comes to longevity and making it possible to live for a very long time, hundreds of years?
I think our brains right now, honestly, are set up in a way that they seem, I talk to a lot of people who are still quite bright in their 90s, and it seems like the way this is set up is they're set to be comfortable with mortality and have a natural arc. So I think there would be you have to understand the brain a lot better. I'm not clear it's designed to live for 150 or 200 years right now. I think you'd have to do something very different to how we experience our arc of our lives and the natural arc of our lives. I'm not saying that it's wrong to change the natural arc of our lives. I think it'd be great if it was very comfortable and normal and healthy to live to 200. But I think there's just some really dramatic challenges with the brain that we don't even understand yet at all, and that our bodies right now are really they did not evolve to do that as far as I can tell. So I think longevity, as I see it, like Peter Attia is my neighbor here in Austin, who had the best-selling book on longevity last year. And I think there's a lot of good frameworks for cardiovascular health, for staying strong and staying mobile into our old age, and living very healthy in our 80s and 90s. But that's kind of my version of longevity I'm going for right now. If someone much smarter than me can re-engineer humanity and re-engineer the arc of our brains to be really healthy and work into our 130s and 40s, I love it. It seems very difficult. It seems like a fundamental challenge we don't understand yet.
So, Yes, Aubrey's.
Oh, you want me to do it now, do you? All right. Okay, give me a microphone, somebody.
Can you still hear me when I speak here? Can you still hear me, Joe?
Yes, I can still hear you. Aubrey knows a lot more about this than me, so now you scared me. You tell me what I didn't. I appreciate.
There you go. Yeah, so the fundamental thing that we have to remember when we look at questions like the one you just raised is the fact that we're only going to be getting older at 1 year per year. There won't be any 200-year-old people for at least another 100 years, whatever happens. And that's a very long time to develop ways to adapt to any problems of the sort you might be raising with regard to how the brain copes with this or that thing that it wasn't evolved to cope with. I think, we do know already that this is, if it's a problem at all, it's going to be a problem that only emerges very gradually as we get older. And it seems to me that we are pretty much certain to be able to develop the technologies that will be needed that you describe if we have already got to the point where we can keep the body useful.
Well, I hope that makes sense as well. I hope you're right. I'm not sure what you think of my friend Rick Klausner and Altos and all these. They're spending billions of dollars and trying to understand fundamentally how the genetic aging works and how to turn it back. And they're building drugs right now to target it. And you know what? You guys may end up testing some of those drugs on your island if the U.S. doesn't let them do it. So there are some smart efforts here, as far as I can tell.
Hi, Joe. Hey, Joe, this is Joe. I'm here to ask a question. I, like you, am fairly bullish in the United States and zones specifically in the United States. However, there might be some political difficulties, to put it lightly, to implement zones on a federal level, or even the state level. There's a lot of political capture. Should we be looking at more nimble jurisdictions that have equivalent and arguably even higher status that are in the United States, like federally recognized tribes, which can have the policy and ability to fill in a lot of the gaps you're talking about in those sectors?
Yeah, I was just on the phone with the Chickasaw Nation the other day. I'm not sure they're actually set up for this yet, but there's a lot of very smart groups that tribes that also are worth tens of billions of dollars. That I think it's not a bad idea at all. I think it's most likely to be successful if it's done very aggressively in some of the more sophisticated red states. Because I just think it's really, I don't know if the tribes have all the apparatus you'd need to actually prove this out and make it work. But I think it's worth trying on both accounts. I 100% like the idea of these zones. I'm a little nervous what it would take federally for them to allow them to opt out of these things. I don't know if it's a law or an amendment or what. I haven't studied that. But if you're working on that and you have ideas of what's going to be allowed and why, again, it goes back to the gaps. Which gaps are you allowed to avoid with the SEC or the FCC or the FDA or HUD? It may be the case that just a law federally plus the state combined would let you do this. And if we ever get in charge again with a good government, I'd love to have that policy ready and I'd love to convince people, because I think people at the federal level on the right are very open to these types of things. And so this is probably a very worthwhile thing to pursue.
Perfect. And I can touch base with you another time, but just to let you know, we're with the Catawba Indian Nation. They developed a special economic zones right into the Charlotte region. They passed a law, and they can do it largely off of their own jurisdiction. And because of the constitutional rules of construction with tribal law and how that fits in the Constitution, it's kind of as if the Chevron doctrine didn't exist and that major questions were for everything. Yeah. You need to have explicit approval from Congress before federal agencies actually have jurisdiction. So that means that
Well, that sounds very promising. We should probably get Elon to help us build some infrastructure for some Indians. So let's talk about it.
We have 600 acres of formerly the biggest textile mill in the world, so that'd be great.
All right, send me a note. I think this is really smart. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Cool. Is there another more reasons to be optimistic or things to watch when it comes to startup cities in the United States? Right. So I've heard here in Texas there might be things that are possible.
There's positive things and there's negative things. The negative thing is NIMBYism is alive and well everywhere in red states and blue states. It's, we just passed a law in Texas to try to get around this, where if the local jurisdiction doesn't approve a permit for any kind of construction in 45 days, you can go around them and go to a third party. So we are working with the state. That's kind of a bright spot to make it easier. I think it's still extraordinarily difficult to do these things. Now that said, I think there's, the U.S. is way ahead of the rest of the world economically right now, And the biggest way we should all be aware as entrepreneurs, the next 5 or 6 years, I'm fully aligned with the productivity that's going to come from a lot of this AI stuff. I'm spending a lot of time in this. I'm seeing some of my brightest friends, who run giant companies. People like Michael Dell say I'm going to be 20% more productive even within 2 years. So there's a whole other set of things we're building for the next part. So I'm seeing trillions of dollars of productivity are going to come. So the U.S. is going to be so far ahead. There's going to be so much wealth, and there is so much frustration building with this movement. I think there's a really strong movement right now that is aligned with the people in this audience. So I think it's a really good time to fight for some of these things here, because we will have the wealth. We will have the kind of the push to do it with our leaders. Our leaders are getting more fed up with how broken things are in government, and they want the voters want some more radical solutions to get around these total messes, because they know, like you guys know, how much is being destroyed now. There's an intuition from the government. So yeah, I think the U.S. could be a really good place for us to build these things. I don't think it's happening right now in the right way, but I feel there's a sense that we could get into this in the next 5 or 10 years. It could be a big movement, and hopefully there'll be lessons by then to learn, hopefully positive lessons from Prospera and others.
Great. Also, in the audience, if anyone wants to ask questions, raise your hand. We have a second mic. My question is, what do you disagree most with Balaji?
Balaji is an amazing man who I love. He's a friend. I think I'm probably more skeptical of how broken the CCP is relative to the U.S. than he is. What I would say, and I'm happy to hear the counter arguments, obviously, but what I would say is that the CCP is much more run by a single crazy personality than it ever has been before. And the entire party, in terms of where there are lots of people running it, they're all very against creative destruction, because the current CCP owns stakes in a lot of major industries, which are the exact industries that need higher productivity and that are going to get higher productivity in the US, because we still have a free enough system that we could do that. Whereas in China, there's no way they're going to let themselves be disrupted that way, because it would hurt them. And so without that ability to disrupt themselves and have the creative destruction in the core big industries, and with the fact that you actually have a truly insane and mentally deranged person in charge, and then you have the demographic challenges, I think the U.S., despite our world challenges, we're going to overcome them. We're going to beat them. I have a lot of my Jewish friends on the left. I'm Jewish, but I'm not on the left, who helped cause a lot of the woke things, along with other people on the left. And they're coming around. They're realizing after October 7th how stupid they were about this. And so, I mean, I'm very optimistic that it's possible to fight. We're not going to fix Harvard. Harvard is done. So that's done. Like, people trying to fix that are stupid. But we are going to be able to fix and build new things in our society, and building a new university that's going to be more important than Harvard in 10 years. And in China, that wouldn't be allowed. Here, my university will definitely be more important than the other top universities, because you are allowed to do that. And so yeah, I just think he's a little bit too cynical on what can still be done, in the most important country in the world.
Hey Joe, this is Dave McClure. Wondered what your thoughts. How you doing? Wonder what your thoughts are on entrepreneurship and capital initiatives coming out of the UAE and Saudi these days.
Sorry, thoughts on entrepreneurship and capital coming out of
the UAE and Saudi.
Oh, UAE and Saudi. I've been surprised about some of the talent I've seen in Saudi. I've only been there a few times, and like there's these like women in burqas that came up to me and are like, "Well, am I in trouble? What's going to happen?" After I spoke, and like they were from MIT, and they had these like tech stuff they were building, and I was like, "What?" It totally disagreed with how I thought Saudi was going to work. And UAE is probably the best run country in the Middle East. Like, people running it are very smart. I think there are certain parts of it that are captured. I think there's like people who have become friends with the leaders who built big things like G42 that basically kind of run a lot of stuff going on there, and that block outsiders very effectively. So I think they do have, some crony problems. At the same time, I think the investors there are great. I think they're trying to open up some talent. I'm very bullish on the Middle East the next 10 or 15 years, especially if we can get the relationship with UAE and Saudi, with Israel, in a positive way, which I think, despite Iran trying to derail it with everything recently, I think there's a very good chance if you fast forward 5 years, those countries are working together, and that part of the world is going to grow really, really well, and they're definitely going to succeed in diversifying away from their oil economies. So overall, very, some weird cronyism, some scary backwards things, some very broken things in the bottom of Saudi society, hiding away, still trying to kill off the leader, still trying to bring it back to the dark ages. So it's definitely challenges, but UAE is very well run. Saudi's going the right direction, so optimistic overall.
Cool. I know you have a hard stop at 5, Joe, so maybe we'll take 1 or 2 more if we can get them in, but try to be quick.
Yeah. Hi, Joe. I really enjoyed your podcast with Balaji the other day, in which you discussed how broken the education system is. And here in Prospera/Vitalia, we're planning to set up our own research institute. It's called the Frontier Institute. We want to study progress studies and what makes economies successful, and to also be a sort of so-called safe space for heterodox thinkers and academics. So maybe you could elaborate a bit on the problems you're seeing, what you're doing at UT Austin, and what kind of models you're excited about in the education space.
I love it. Well, I'm excited to hear more about the Frontier Institute. At University of Austin, we're really trying to, along with some really top people in the academic world who are heterodox thinkers, like my friend Neil Ferguson, and people like Barry Weiss, we're trying to prove you can rebuild U.S. institutions. And so one part of it is just getting just the best and brightest around it in a framework doesn't have the problems of the others. I think the other parts of it, I think you want things to be much more interdisciplinary. I think you want much more accountability. You don't want like permanent tenure as like very sleepy and 18th century and it just doesn't really work at all in terms of practice. You need a dynamic system where people come and hit goals and work together, more like in an innovation company. I think you do need, speaking of that, more innovators involved in these things. And so one thing that's changed a lot the last 30 years is a lot of our best and brightest used to go and be professors. And they're pretty consistently, in many cases, the very top of society intellectually. Now, the very top society intellectually is pretty consistently in the very top innovative companies. So if you want this place, if you want the heterodox thinkers to be part of moving the world ahead, they need to find some way to include these people who are at the top of the innovation world, who very often are actually the highest IQ, kind of on the edge, pushing the world forward people. And so these places don't become real places anymore without that combination. So those are some of my thoughts.
Hi, Joe. This is Carl Peterson. You sort of mentioned, we've discussed your university, we've discussed sort of potential reforms for the U.S. government, we've discussed new jurisdictions. Are there any sort of areas that you think need disruption, whether in the U.S. or internationally, that you don't have the time or energy to put into, that you'd like to see others disrupt?
Yeah, I think government and healthcare are the two biggest, most broken areas in the U.S. in terms of parts, how big they are part of the economy. Government means lots of things. It means defense. It means other areas. Healthcare is 20% of our economy here. We have a lot of the best innovation in the world. We have every single part of this healthcare apparatus, but 7 of them are all captured by corrupt actors that use government to break them. So, and then of course we talked about universities. In terms of other areas, I think the media is extremely important to redo. We need a trusted media. We need to rebuild that from scratch. I actually do have time, unfortunately, to work on that. So I am helping a lot there. Barry Weiss is doing a much better job than anyone else I know, but I am going to start a lot of that in different areas too. I think the NGO complex I haven't really had time to work on. I do think it's probably some role for nonprofits in society. I think they should not be run by socialist progressives who get government money to build voting machines to elect progressives, which is basically how the U.S. works nowadays. So I've not had time to fix those, but they definitely need to be rebuilt, and they definitely need to be defunded when they're using government to do ideological stuff as opposed to be good nonprofits helping things. I think probably our university, speaking of nonprofits, I think I think a lot of our museum apparatus is totally broken and totally captured as well ideologically, which is really sad, and they've become activists. And so I think then you just look at all the institutions in the U.S. society and go through them. And unfortunately, there's just a lot we have to do to, some of these we can recapture them and fix them, and some of them we're just going to have to rebuild. And so just a lot of work ahead of us, the next generation.
Joe, I know you had a hard stop, so thank you for coming on, and let's give Joe Lonsdale one more applause.